Alberta and British Columbia are on opposite sides of the pipeline debate again, as the province's premiers push their plans for the future of the country's energy and economy. Premier Daniel Smith says Alberta is now pitching itself as the proponent to make a pipeline happen.
Without question, a new oil pipeline to the northwest BC coast would have the greatest economic benefit of any new nation-building project.
Smith says her government will put up $14 million and lead the proposal to develop and submit a formal application for it to be on the federal government's list of major infrastructure projects. It's something Smith says the province must do because private industry is not yet willing to commit the necessary capital, given, she says, existing federal oil tanker regulations and emissions caps. All of this has drawn the ire of BC's Premier, David Eby.
Premier Smith continues to advance a project that is entirely taxpayer funded, has no private sector proponent, is not a real project. When I've said, let's cross that bridge when we come to it, we'll see what the Premier comes up with, I'm being polite. I am being polite. There is no project. There is no bridge to cross.
What we've said is that if Alberta wants to be a proponent, they want to put the money forward to work as a proponent for a pipeline, that's their right to do so. When they bring it forward, like every other project, at that point, we'll take a look at what where they are, and we'll evaluate it at that time.
Major oil and gas companies will be giving the province advice, but those companies won't necessarily be involved if the project proceeds. The executive chairman of Cenovus Energy is co-leading the advisory group, assisting the government with its pipeline pitch. Alex Pourbaix, chairman of Cenovus Energy, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks very much for having me, Rosemary.
I want to talk about sort of what is different in this proposal that the province is putting forward. You have an enormous amount of experience. You tried to get Keystone XL, Energy East, both off the ground. Obviously, neither of them went ahead. So what is different about the proposal or about the approach this time, do you think?
Well, I think there's a number of things. I think number one, I think there is a very much growing appreciation across the globe that oil and gas are absolutely vital building blocks of strong economies, and that we're going to need them for many, many decades to come. I think, 10 or 12 years ago, there was much more of a view that renewables, battery technology, were really going to render oil and gas obsolete in short order. And I think experience has shown us that demand for oil and gas continues to grow globally. Canada has some of the largest reserves in the entire planet, the strongest environmental regulations, and I think Canadians are starting to maybe appreciate a little more the importance of this industry to our economy, and I think more importantly, the ability of this industry to really help turn our economy around and grow our economy.
Okay, so let's talk about a couple of the things that, may stand in your way. You talked about strong environmental regulations. You are one of a handful of energy companies that sent a letter to the Prime Minister back in the spring calling on him to repeal the tanker ban, the cap on emissions, suggesting the Assessment Act needed to be reviewed or overhauled in some way. He instead has put in place C5, which allows the government to exempt certain projects from some of those kinds of regulations. So if the regulations themselves and laws remain in place, do you think a pipeline can still get built?
No, not without those changes that have been recommended by that industry letter that you referred to. And I think the Premier has been equally clear with the Prime Minister that the rationale why the province is going to be the initial proponent for this project is that with that list of regulations that you referred to in place, I don't think industry believes they are so onerous, so challenging, and create so much uncertainty in the regulatory process that I don't think any private proponent would ever consider investing the very, very significant dollars that are required to file this kind of application with that level of uncertainty.
One of the other things that you talked about there in terms of challenges for a future pipeline, some Indigenous communities, particularly the ones where at this stage the pipeline would likely go through, are strongly against this. I'm thinking of the Coastal First Nations Great Bear Initiative. The Premier of BC also has said that he is alarmed by the suggestion. They point particularly to the tanker ban as something that they believe is really important. So what do you say to either communities who have the concerns or the Premier of British Columbia to try and get them to at least consider this or be reassured by some of the things you might say?
Well, I think the first thing that we're going to do is really demonstrate through this advisory group that I'm chairing. We have strong Indigenous support on that committee, but I think it's an absolute priority for the committee that there is early and often engagement with Indigenous communities and to ensure that their concerns are addressed and that they have the evidence and the facts that they don't have to worry about this. The fact of the matter is, marine movement of oil is an extraordinarily safe transport system. We have double hull tankers, incredible improvements in safety, over the last 40 or 50 years.
Daniel Smith said that if this proposal is a test of Canada, that if it doesn't go ahead, if another pipeline is not built, it is somehow a failure of the country. Is that a sentiment you echo? Because it puts an enormous amount of pressure, not only on the federal government, obviously, but on those who don't think that this is the right path forward.
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is talk about the scale of this opportunity for the country. And, the Premier quoted a statistic a couple of days ago at that announcement where she stated that if Energy East, Keystone XL, and Northern Gateway had gone ahead, the impact right now today would be somewhere in the range of an incremental $50 to $55 billion a year in GDP. That's the kind of scale that further development of Western Canada's oil and gas sector can drive this country. I don't think there's another industry in the country that can remotely bring that kind of benefit to the economy, and that is providing tax revenue, jobs, massive benefits for the country. And I think, she said, and I would agree with her statement, that we have to work collectively as provinces. In the past, we have, the pipelines to move oil and gas around this country have largely moved north to south. That has exposed us to the risk that we have all seen over the past several months with respect to tariffs, with respect to trade issues, and frankly, having the vast majority of your product go to one buyer is probably not strategically sound in any case. And this is an opportunity to drive this incredible economic prosperity for Canada. And it's going to take a little cooperation, frankly, a little support from provinces working together.
Alex Pourbaix, let's speak again as this gets underway and as you begin your talks with other people and communities. Thank you so much for your time.
Happy to do it. Thanks again, Rosemary.
First Nations in British Columbia have many different views on the pipeline, some willing to consider development, while others very vocally against it.
And there are those that are doing that and considering it. But I also say those that are impacted, especially on the coast, with oil tankers, there's already oil tankers going back and forth. But if there's more, that's where the concern happens.
This is something that, is not nation building for coastal First Nations of British Columbia, that it very much, goes to the heart of, the risk being borne onto the communities of the Central Coast.
So multiple perspectives on the pipelines, but the British Columbia government has made its position pretty clear. Adrian Dix is BC's Minister of Energy and Climate Solutions. Nice to see you again, Minister.
Great to be on the show.
The government has criticized Alberta's plans or its proposal for a new pipeline. Your premier said it was vague and not a real project. Why is your government not willing to consider it as a project?
Well, right now there's no proponent, which means there's no business plan, no real project. There's no possibility of the take-or-pay contracts that would be needed to finance and support it. In other words, there's no market. There are dramatically better alternatives, even for Alberta and for the industry, at significantly lower costs. I mean, fraction of what this proposal would cost. It would lead to a real, I think, problem in terms of the social license we have for the massive economic development taking place on the North Coast that includes $50 billion in LNG projects under construction, but a huge number of clean energy projects, the North Coast Transmission Line, and mining projects in the Northwest. We have consensus on those projects in part because groups such as the Coastal First Nations know that there's a tanker ban in place. So that's important for our economy. And of course, it's our job as British Columbia to defend our economy and defend our coast. And we wouldn't be talking about this at all if this project didn't largely go through British Columbia.
Sure. As I'm sure you know, earlier this week, the former Alberta Premier told David Cochrane, and said on the line in social media, criticized the Premier and said that he was objectively a bigger threat to Confederation than Alberta separatists. How do you respond to the notion that British Columbia may be standing in the way of a national project that would bring wealth to the Canadian economy?
Well, we're doing no such thing. LNG, for example, a project of national importance. Who else says so? The Prime Minister, Mark Carney, and others. There were no LNG projects, zero capital investment when the NDP came to office. There's now $50 billion in projects under construction, and including the LNG Canada 2 and other projects that are available, many, many more in if I dare say, the pipeline. And what that tells you, I think, is that we are dramatically promoting economic development in BC. We've got a clean energy plan, our North Coast Transmission Line, another national project. Will open up mining in the northwest of our province. So we heard Mr. Kenney's comments. I know when we come as a sort of commentator and is inspired by Truth Social and Fox News, one gets inspired to make these kind of statements. I don't think they're very healthy, and they're certainly not true in any possible way. Premier Eby is a leader on economic development, and we're showing that every single day.
Maybe a leader on economic development within the province, but Alberta feels that it has a case to make, and it would like to be able to convince the Premier and British Columbians, some of whom might support an oil pipeline, although of course not everyone. Is there anything that Alberta could say that would convince BC that it should at least consider this?
Well, remember, I think it's more than that. I mean, I believe we have a responsibility too. And we've shown that. You know that TMX has a proposal to dramatically increase the value and the opportunity in the pipeline that we as a people of Canada own, because we spent $34 billion on it. Basically, they've written off more than half of that, the federal government has. And so it's already taking a loss it's certainly well north of $10 billion on that pipeline. So that was just built. Saw a 300% increase in oil from Alberta through British Columbia last year, and largely with destinations in the United States and in China. And we're working with them on other projects. So I think all of that's reasonable. Our point on this project, and that's why it's important, there's no proponent, no business case, is that the project itself is divisive, but it's not a real project yet. And so when people say, oh, well, you're putting things at stake, what exactly are we putting at stake? When we propose the dozens of projects we're putting forward, they have proponents and business plans and need some support from the federal government to have them go forward. And I think that's a way to contribute to Canada. And many of those projects, by the way, benefit Alberta as well.
Tell me how important the tanker ban is in British Columbia, because obviously things are shipped to British Columbia. The port is important, but how important is a tanker ban to other projects and things being developed?
Well, it's of course a federal policy,
Yes.
and has been in place in some form or another. It was really started by a guy named David Anderson, who I remember more than you, probably, Rosemary, but he was a significant figure in BC politics. He was a Liberal MP in the 1970s, 71, back then. The tanker ban has been largely supported in different forms. It was a voluntary ban for some time, and now it's in federal legislation. That ban's important in two ways. One, it protects the coast. And people will say, well, there's some tankers on the coast. Of course we serve communities on the coast. That's normal, and that's part of the policy that's in place. But we're talking about a massive increase in tankers on the North Coast, and people on the North Coast have generally not been supportive of that. And it's foundational in this sense. It's not a question of environment against economy, because the coast has an enormous value to our economy in and of itself, and salmon and many other things. That's that, but also it's foundational to all the other things we're doing. The port and hydrogen and LNG and mining and all the things that are happening in the Northwest. So it is significantly important to our economy and to our environment. That's why, as a BC government, we are absolutely working to contribute to the national economic vision by driving projects that are real, that we've developed consensus for, and we're going forward with. And that's our approach, and it's different than some other provinces. It's not, with great respect, a tunnel under the 401. It's not a pipeline with no business plan, no proponent, and no plan.
It is, though, an attempt to try and diversify where oil is sold, away from solely the United States and into other markets. And as Canada grapples with ways to diversify trade, that is another argument that people who are for the pipeline put forward. What would you say to that?
Well, I say that we've done that, of course, recently. There has been a pipeline through British Columbia recently, the TMX pipeline, that has dramatically increased access to Asian markets. It's not full yet, but hopefully it will be. There's an opportunity to expand that pipeline's capacity significantly at very low cost. And we haven't been objecting to those things. In fact, we've been contributing to discussions around those things because we are concerned with the success of other provinces, including Alberta, who are our neighbors. So this is the way we've been acting, substantively on substantive projects. And there's no threats there. There's no problems there. We're just saying what we think. And in terms of this project, which would, in our view, negatively affect BC's economy and obviously the North Coast and our environment, we have significant issues that we've raised. And I think that's quite reasonable.
Minister Adrian Dix, thank you for your time.
Great to be on the show. Look forward to it again.
This is a test of whether Canada works as a country. Because if we can't build with collaboration of the federal government and between provinces, if it's everybody gets to get their products going to market except Alberta, that's not a country.
Premier Smith continues to advance a project that is entirely taxpayer funded, has no private sector proponent, is not a real project, and is incredibly alarming to British Columbians, including First Nations along the coast.
As Premier Danielle Smith pushes for a new pipeline project and is calling for cooperation from BC, the plan already, as you heard there, facing resistance from BC Premier David Eby and some coastal First Nations. So what's at stake for the provinces, for Ottawa? Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Catherine Lévesque is a parliamentary reporter for the National Post. She's in Ottawa. Emma Graney is an energy reporter for the Globe and Mail in Calgary, and Rob Shaw is a political correspondent for CHEK News in BC. So we've got everybody represented here in this scrum anyway. Emma, I'm going to start with you because I think you broke this story. You were the first one to report what Alberta was putting on the table. What is the Premier's play here? Is it real or is it about pushing people politically?
I think it's hard to say that it's real at this point, right? I mean, Premier Eby does have a point. It doesn't exist yet, right? They haven't even decided on which route they might take from Alberta to northern BC. But certainly this is something that Danielle Smith has been pushing for a very long time. all of this year, every time I see her speak, particularly at energy events, she's like, oh, that pipeline thing's coming. Oh, yeah, we're totally nearly there. And even a couple of weeks ago, she said, yep, we're going to have something in a couple of weeks. And this is what they've come up with. And it is interesting because it's the province taking the lead here. There are no private sector, no one's on the table wanting to take responsibility for this yet. It's Alberta coming to the table with a plan and hoping that they can possibly get the federal government on side and BC on side. And that's going to be the real challenge here.
Okay, so Rob, what is the likelihood that BC can be convinced? I mean, the Premier is obviously taking some of the time away from this by saying, as Emma said, there's no private proponents, so it isn't real. But it is a real conversation, whether he wants to have it or not.
Yeah, well, BC's position is no. But you wouldn't know that from listening to the Premier the last 5 months, because he started with, I'm not saying no, in May, which led to it's an oversimplification to say I'm saying no in June, to we'll cross that bridge if the Premier of Alberta can get to it in July. And now he's saying there's no bridge, it's not real, we don't want it. And so but we know BC's fought this fight before, right? And we know that it cannot stop a pipeline. We know it can't withhold permits. It tried to introduce a law to limit oil from Alberta. That was shot down by the courts. The only thing it can do is run a PR war to increase the risk to anyone who might be looking at this thing that doesn't want to fight Premier Eby in public about it. And he can also whip up the coastal First Nations who are already there saying that they don't want this as well. So, it will become a kind of fight in the court of public opinion for a while until the adult in the room, the Prime Minister, weighs in and figures it out.
Yeah, and as you point out, as people understand, this it would run through BC, but this is a federal jurisdiction. So the Ottawa could say, we don't care that you don't want it. Let's go ahead. That brings us to Catherine, who it does seem that this is, maybe not a test of the Prime Minister, but it certainly puts some pressure on him and his government.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think in the end, the Carney government will have to make those real decisions to see, are we repealing those Trudeau-era climate policies, notably the tanker ban? And I know there's a lot of concern within the BC Liberal caucus right now about whether or not the government will do that. I'll refer to Energy Minister Tim Hodgson's comments on Friday when he was literally asked, is the government considering repealing the tanker ban? And he said it was a hypothetical question at this point. So, I spoke to an MP after those comments who said, well, I'm really not reassured with that and with that answer. And that means that the Carney government may be considering this. So I think it's going to be, political hot potato in the next few months. And the federal government will have to come to a decision soon because Danielle Smith, the Premier, is hoping to be in the next tranche of projects in November. Now, I'm not sure that's going to happen, but certainly she hopes to have something in place by May 2026. So we'll see if that happens. Yeah. I know the federal government says, well, look, we'll take a look at the project when it happens, but it's really a chicken or egg, dilemma here. Should we repeal those policies or should we not? And, that is really a condition that the private, proponents have said they want to see before they can even pitch this project.
Yeah. I'm not even sure it would at this stage qualify for the major projects criteria. Like I don't know that she has enough there at this stage. Maybe once some work is done, but I would be skeptical that it would even meet that bar. Before I go back to you, Emma, Rob, I want to get you to weigh in on the tanker ban and how important or not that is to British Columbia.
The thing to understand about the BC NDP government is the tanker ban is just one step too far. This is a premier who's willing to embrace mining. He's willing to embrace fracking of natural gas. He's willing to embrace LNG. He's willing to embrace hydroelectric dams that, the NDP years ago did not support any of that. He's gone way down a road towards resource development. He has his eye on a bunch of projects, but oil tankers just cannot exist within the BC NDP's base. It is just a step too far. So even if the Premier wanted to do this, I don't think his party would let him do it. And he's already at the edge of what his party will allow, and he's in all sorts of trouble here in British Columbia. So it is, I think, a step too far for a new Democrat government in BC to even say out loud that they would be willing to consider dropping the tanker ban.
And has a leadership review coming up, I think, too, right? So that probably factors in. Yeah, it factors into his thinking. So Emma, how does the Alberta government continue to say that all these different things have to be removed in order for a pipeline to happen, given that the point of C5 was to exempt projects from regulations and laws if needed, but the Premier seems to think that all these things have to be completely upended if any pipeline were to go ahead?
Yeah, and look, the Premier's office and indeed when this plan was kind of getting developed, I mean, part of it was, well, private proponents aren't coming to the table. Pipeline companies, oil companies aren't coming to the table because it would be illegal for them to do so. Therefore, we have to do something in order to kind of rip the Band-Aid off and get something going. But Danielle Smith has been extremely vocal about getting rid of a whole bunch of these policies. It's the tanker ban, it's the emissions cap, it's basically, C59, anything that she thinks is standing in the way of oil and gas sector development. She wants to see them ripped up and she wants to see them completely gone. And whether or not the Carney government is willing to just rip them up and what do they replace them with at some point? And I know Tim Hodgson, the energy minister federally, has said something along those lines, like, well, where do we go? Do we just not have climate anywhere on our platform anymore? So I think that you'll continue to see Smith really pushing to get those things ripped up. But it will be interesting to see as well how Pathways, the carbon capture project that has been kind of halfly, referred to the Major Projects Office, how that fits into this conversation as well, because I think that's a really massive part of it.
Catherine, when the Premier says that this is a test of Canada, how does that play politically? Because that does sort of put everyone on notice in terms of how she's viewing this.
I certainly see it as a risk for the Carney government. She's putting the federal government in a really difficult position, and she's really putting the onus on the federal government to, decide whether or not a pipeline will be built. Another risk I'm seeing is that, approving a pipeline without it meeting the national building projects criteria, I mean, it would make the Major Projects Office political, which is something I think the federal government doesn't want it to be. And so, look, I think I see where she's coming from. I know she's been very consistent about wanting a pipeline, and that's something that, Prime Minister Carney and even Minister Hodgson have been open to. But this is a new project that is not, consistent with the Pathways Alliance. This is, a bitumen pipeline. This is a brand new pipeline. And she seems like she's not willing to put any taxpayer money, well, except maybe those $14 million she announced this week. But, it seems like all of the risk is going to the federal government. So I think it's going to be really difficult politically. And there's no consensus even within the Liberal caucus on this.
Last word to you, Rob, on whether this is a future national unity problem, as the Premier seems to suggest.
Well, we're 8 months from talking about Team Canada, right? And what is Team Canada? Is it making liquor? Is it making BC's wine more available to other provinces, and we have to take their wine that tastes like vinegar? Like, is that the whole point? At some point, provinces have to start compromising, and that'll be the sell to BC. It'll be like, look, we're going to support your natural gas. We're going to help you with ports, but you have to take this pipeline. And really, that grand bargain that the Prime Minister keeps talking about, it gets real on this project, on this issues, and on the points that have been outlined.
Okay, Catherine, Emma, Rob, that was. I'm glad we had everyone represented in terms of regions, because that helped us understand the conversation. We'll talk next hour about the Prime Minister's trip to DC. Thank you all very much.
Thanks.